The hum of the warship's engines was low and ceaseless, resonating through corridors of gleaming metal. In the observation deck, a lone Quanari intelligence officer, known simply as Observer Lyran, stood contemplating the window of reinforced glass. Beyond it lay the planet designated Earth, tiny and blue, enveloped in swirling white clouds. The planet seemed unremarkable at first glance. Yet Lyran couldn't ignore the order that had brought him and the entire Galactic Empire's Devastator-class warship across the void of space. They were to retrieve a human subject, specifically a woman, for advanced study. It was a mission that, on the surface, seemed laughably trivial to the Empire. Humans, from all recorded preliminary surveys, possessed only 2 centuries of radio technology. Primitive, unformed, hardly worth the time or resources of a military vessel that had conquered star systems. But High Command had insisted there was something about this particular species, some anomaly in how they processed fear, that warranted close investigation. The retrieval had been planned with the usual efficiency, a covert descent over a region the humans called North America, an organized infiltration team to identify and teleport the subject. Lyran had stood on the command deck, monitoring data readouts. Earth's population was immense, billions spread across multiple continents. Selecting one specific target among so many was no easy feat, but they had located a human female who met all genetic and psychological markers the Science Directorate had requested. Lyran was uncertain as to why those markers were so important, but he'd learned not to question the Empire's higher echelons. Obedience was what had kept him alive for so many cycles, rising through the ranks of intelligence. He watched the retrieval procedure from a series of holographic feeds. In each feed, the perspective flickered through the eyes of different Quanari soldiers on the ground. They wore advanced optical visors, scanning for Tessa Blackwood, the Earthwoman in question. Earth's setting, an evening sky streaked with neon from a nearby city, looked oddly tranquil. Lyran saw a small dwelling where Tessa was reportedly located. The infiltration team, clad in dark exosuits, moved with practiced stealth. The command channel buzzed with updates. Primary subject identified. Moving in. Initiate teleport. There was a brief, distorted flash on the holograms. Then Tessa vanished from the feed, replaced by swirling motes of light. Moments later, the infiltration team confirmed successful capture. Lyran switched to the interior feed of the warship's teleportation bay. In a stutter of phosphorescent brilliance, the captive materialized. She appeared disoriented, though only for a second. Security Chief Mara was on standby, flanked by 2 troopers. They trained scanning devices at the new arrival, expecting chaos, panic, or at least stunned confusion. Instead, Tessa Blackwood stood upright, rubbed the back of her neck, and looked around with an air of puzzled calm. Lyran's ridged brows furrowed. Generally, abducted life forms displayed immediate terror in front of species they had never seen, on a ship they had never imagined existed. Tessa blinked a few times, then addressed the nearest trooper. "Nice trick," she said in a voice that the warship's universal translator quickly rendered into Quanari standard. "A little rough on the landing, but I'll give it a 6 out of 10. Where am I?" Security Chief Mara barked at her to remain silent, to kneel, to show fear. Tessa, for her part, studied Mara with faint curiosity. Lyran wasn't sure if Tessa recognized how outmatched she was. Mara stood nearly 7 feet tall, with 4 arms, 2 dedicated to combat, 2 to dexterous tasks. But Tessa only put her hands on her hips, glancing at the technology around her. She made a small remark about, "You guys must be from pretty far away," which Mara curtly ignored, forcibly guiding her into a containment chamber. This was the standard procedure for new captives, a sealed cell of metallic walls that could shift temperature and gravity to subdue even the most resilient creature. Lyran half expected the woman to have a belated breakdown. Instead, she surveyed her cell with a faint, irritated sigh. Lyran's first official assessment, recorded in a hush of his private data log, was that Tessa Blackwood exhibited unusual composure. She had no weapons, no discernible enhancements. only a simple bag at her side, containing small personal objects. Usually, captive subjects erupted in screams or pleaded for mercy when first confronted with advanced alien life. But Tessa's reaction was milder than any they had ever observed. That small detail seemed odd enough for Lyran to note. He left the observation deck and proceeded to the command center. The warship's corridors were lined with imposing black metal, glowing with lines of pale light. He passed squads of Quanari soldiers who saluted him out of habit. As an observer in Imperial intelligence, Lyran held a rank that commanded respect. He found Commander Varix at his usual station, a raised platform in the center of the command chamber, from which Varix's large, serpentine form could oversee every crucial function of the vessel. Varix's 4 eyes each focused on different data displays, all relaying vital statistics about Earth. At Lyran's approach, the commander let out a distinct hiss, signaling a mixture of impatience and smug satisfaction. "So, observer," Varix said, "it appears we have our specimen. I trust the infiltration team reported minimal complications." Lyran bowed his head. "Correct, Commander. The subject was retrieved without incident." He paused. "I've noticed something unusual about her reaction. She exhibits almost no outward signs of fear." Varix let out a wet, clicking noise from his throat sacs, the Quanari equivalent of a cynical chuckle. These humans barely understand their place in the cosmos. One might call it ignorance, not courage. He waved a manipulator dismissively. "We have subjugated 47 species across 3 galactic arms. This human will bend." The commander's confidence was unwavering, so Lyran opted to hold his tongue about his concerns. Instead, he followed as Varix walked to the nearest monitoring console, which showed a live feed of Tessa pacing around the containment chamber. She ran her fingers along the wall's metallic surface, as if testing for hidden compartments. The camera zoomed in on her face, revealing more curiosity than alarm. A swift pang of doubt rippled through Lyran's mind. Perhaps Commander Varix was right. Perhaps it was ignorance or shock. The best course of action was to watch and record. Within the next hour, Tessa was subjected to the initial round of standard intimidation protocols. This was routine for newly captured subjects. Shift the cell's temperature from freezing to sweltering in short intervals. Vary the gravitational pull so that the occupant would feel disoriented, then flood the cell with pulses of ultraviolet light. Most species buckled under these conditions. Their sense of control evaporated, leaving them desperate and trembling. Tessa, however, remained on her feet, bracing herself when gravity doubled. When the temperature plummeted, she rubbed her arms but didn't collapse. When ultraviolet pulses flashed, she shielded her eyes, muttering something about, "This is going to damage your electric bill." She even made a sardonic comment toward the overhead camera. Lyran, watching from the observation station, felt the first real twinge of confusion. Commander Varix was busy dealing with a swarm of reports from the Science Directorate, requests for biological samples, instructions on how to measure Tessa's endocrine responses. Meanwhile, Security Chief Mara arrived, face-tight with frustration. "Commander, the standard intimidation cycle has concluded, but the human subject remains." Mara paused, as if searching for a word. "Obstinate." Varix tapped a set of commands, bringing up Tessa's vitals in holographic form. Elevated heart rate, a spike in cortisol, but no sign of the typical meltdown. He flicked his primary manipulator. "Increase the intensity. If she's trying to hide her fear, we'll root it out soon enough." Lyran spoke cautiously. "Commander, is it wise to escalate so quickly? She might be in shock, or she might have physiological quirks we haven't accounted for." He almost regretted voicing his concern, for Varix whipped 2 of his eyes toward him, a clear sign of displeasure. "You question our protocols, observer?" "Not at all, Commander." Lyran held his head high. "I merely wish to ensure the subject stays alive long enough to be studied. We haven't fully determined if humans are especially fragile or resilient." Varix made that clicking laugh again. "Fine. Proceed with caution, but do proceed. I want to see her fear, and I want to see it soon." An hour later, Tessa was escorted, more accurately, dragged, by two armed guards to the main interrogation chamber. Lyran observed through a one-way visor. The chamber's walls had a faint organic quality, the result of biotech engineering that allowed them to shift shape and secrete psychoactive pheromones, if needed. In the center sat the device they called the chair, though it more resembled a half-living throne. Tessa was strapped into it, her wrists and ankles restrained by sinewy tendrils of alien material. These tendrils could pulse with neurostimuli, generating illusions or sensations designed to terrorize. Tessa bit her lip, grimacing briefly. Lyran was certain she felt pain. Her vitals indicated distress. Yet she didn't beg or plead. Instead, she looked around at the gathered Quanari officers, then said, "You know, if you wanted to talk, you could have just said so." Her voice trembled faintly, but not from overwhelming fear, more from indignation. Commander Varix made a show of, circling her, as if she were a lowly creature in a zoo exhibit. "You do not seem to grasp your predicament. We can make you see and feel your worst nightmares. We can invade your mind. The only reason you are alive is that we find you interesting." Tessa locked eyes with him, though she had to tilt her head back to do so. "I've dealt with my share of nightmares. Some of them are more real than you might guess." When Varix sneered, she raised an eyebrow. "You might want to save your speech about how terrifying you are. I've been abducted before. Twice, in fact." A ripple of confusion passed among the Quanari. Even Lyran felt his chest tighten. Abducted before? There was no record in the Empire's intelligence that Earth had encountered alien contact beyond the standard survey missions. But Tessa seemed entirely genuine. Varix tried to dismiss her words as a bluff, yet her tone was unwavering. "You all love the intimidation routine," Tessa continued. "Trust me, I get it. You look big. You show off your advanced gadgets. You try to break me. Let's just skip ahead. What exactly do you want to know?" Varix hissed. "You do not ask questions of us, human. We ask questions of you." He made a gesture, and one of the guards activated the neural disruptor, a cylindrical device that hummed with an eerie purple glow. Through the monitor, Lyran watched Tessa tense. Her jaw tightened. The disruptor assaulted her nervous system, pushing pain signals directly into her brain. Yet after a few moments, she forced out a shaky exhale. Her vitals spiked, but she remained conscious, her stare locked on Varix. She let out a half-choked laugh that startled everyone present. "That's it," she rasped. "I felt worse headaches after my last rock concert." Varix's eyes flared. He demanded the disruptor be raised to maximum, ignoring the caution from the medical officer. The guard complied, intensifying the purple glow. Tessa squeezed her eyes shut. Her body trembled. Sweat beaded at her temples. Lyran expected her to scream. Instead, she let out another pained laugh, though tears stood in her eyes. "I'd give this an 8 out of 10, she managed. "You've definitely got better toys than the last guys." This was the moment the entire interrogation chamber fell silent. Never had they encountered a subject who seemed almost defiant while in agony. Varix cut the power at last, partly out of frustration, partly out of shock. Tessa sagged in the restraining chair, breathing heavily, but still conscious. One of the Quanari officers present stepped back uneasily. Another whispered something to a colleague, both exchanging uncertain glances. Lyran jotted notes in his data pad with tense deliberation. Subject exhibits advanced pain tolerance. Possible psychological factors. Potential artificial genetic enhancements? Varix signaled for the guards to remove Tessa from the chair. "Take her to the cell," he ordered. "We will proceed to the next stage soon." Tessa offered one last wry remark as they unclasped her restraints. "Great. I look forward to it," she said, half collapsing into the arms of the guards who dragged her away. When the chamber was empty, Varix muttered curses in the Quanari tongue. He turned to Lyran. "There's more going on here. No one remains that calm. I want to see her break." Lyran tapped the data pad's interface. "Commander, with respect, it may be wise to proceed methodically. The medical scans show her physiology has some peculiar markers. We suspect mild genetic modifications." "From whom?" Varix demanded, voice dripping with disbelief. "Earth has no FTL. They're technologically primitive. I don't know, sir, Lyran admitted. But we cannot discount that she may have encountered other species. Varix's throat sacs pulsed in irritation. We will find out, he said. In the meantime, bring the Arturion beetles on board. The mention of the Arturion beetles made Lyran grimace inwardly. Those insects were known for their horrifying method of attacking a subject's nervous system, triggering powerful hallucinogenic cycles. They had broken revolutionaries from the far side of the galaxy, assassins trained to resist every known method of torture. If Tessa Blackwood truly had an unusual resilience, it would be tested. Lyran accompanied Varix to a smaller secure lab, where the medical officer, named Perrin, looked on edge. Commander, the beetles have been delivered in a stasis container. I must remind you that they're extremely unpredictable. Unpredictable is precisely what we need, Varix snapped. Prepare them. Moments later, Tessa was marched in again, her wrists clamped behind her back. She still looked battered from the neural disruptor session, but her gaze was steady as she took in the lab. The stasis container rested on a metal table. Through the transparent material, 5 large, iridescent insects clicked their mandibles. Varix pressed a switch, and the container slid open, allowing the beetles to scuttle about on the table's surface. Tessa eyed them, curiosity lighting her features. Those are new. Some kind of alien arthropods. She glanced around at the lab's occupant. I used to do some side research in entomology. If you're trying to scare me, you might want to pick something that doesn't just look like fancy scarabs. Perrin, the medical officer, couldn't hide his astonishment. He tried to speak, but Varix cut in. These creatures have driven entire civilizations into madness within minutes, he said, voice reverberating through the lab. They will burrow into your flesh and release toxins that make your worst nightmares real. Will you speak now, or must we watch them devour your mind? Tessa gave the table a careful look, then turned her eyes back to Varix. Hate to break it to you, but I've had plenty of nightmares. Once you face them, they stop being nightmares. She exhaled, as though mentally bracing herself. If you're going to do it, get on with it. Varix's frustration was palpable. He signaled to the lab assistant to let the beetles approach Tessa. The assistant, trembling, guided one onto a handling rod and brought it close to her arm. Tessa watched, eyes narrowing. Lyran felt a twist of dread. He'd seen these creatures in action. They typically moved with frantic energy, eager to latch onto living tissue. Yet this beetle drew near Tessa's skin, then abruptly froze. Its mandibles clicked spasmodically, and the once shimmering wings lost some of their luminescence, as if the creature itself were confused or distressed. The entire lab observed in astonishment as the beetle crawled away, then curled into a tight ball, refusing to make contact. The other beetles in the container seemed equally agitated, scattering from each other until they too curled up, motionless. Varix stood speechless, rage and disbelief twisting his features. Perrin ran scans on the insects. They're shutting down, Commander. It's as though they've detected something in her physiology they can't tolerate. They're refusing to host. Tessa's lips curled into a half-smile. Guess your nasty little pets don't like me. She took a deep breath, rolled her shoulders, and faced Varix directly. I don't know what else you've got up your sleeve, but let's make something clear. Fear only works if you let it. I learned that a while back. Varix shouted for the guards to restrain Tessa further, though it was a hollow gesture. She let them clamp her wrists, but her gaze remained on the commander. Lyran sensed the energy in the room shift. The Quanari officers were unsettled, exchanging furtive looks. Their greatest tools of intimidation were failing. Varix could only bark out an order to return Tessa to the cell. In that cell, Tessa refused even a moment of panic. She paced, occasionally sitting to adjust the simple footwear she'd been teleported in. She tested the cell's food dispenser, found the output tepid, and began tinkering with the mechanism. Lyran watched from the monitoring console as she pried open a small panel and rearranged a few wires, apparently trying to fix the erratic temperature that was making her meal inedible. By the time the guards realized she was tampering with equipment, she had already improved the dispenser's output. The feed showed her tasting a self-heating ration packet with an almost satisfied nod. That same feed also captured the two guards exchanging baffled glances. Nothing about the standard scenario was playing out the way it should. Word of Tessa's calm spread. On a warship that prided itself on discipline and fear, rumors blossomed. Soldiers whispered that the human was immune to terror, that she had stared down the neural disruptor and the beetles without so much as a whimper. Some recounted how they had nightmares in which Tessa asked them questions that made them doubt the Empire's entire modus operandi. Morale took a hit. Lyran caught fragments of conversation in corridors, med bays, and storage compartments. Bunkmates muttered about the unstoppable Earth woman. One or two said they'd even seen the beetles shrivel up in her presence, though that might have been an exaggeration. Commander Varix, hearing these rumors, knew the entire crew's efficiency was slipping. He summoned an emergency council in the main briefing chamber. Present were Lyran, Security Chief Mara, Medical Officer Perrin, Tactical Officer Zarek, and a few other high-ranking officials. The tension in the air was electric. Varix glowered at each of them, for eyes scanning their expressions. He demanded solutions. The consensus was that Tessa Blackwood needed to be broken or eliminated before her peculiar brand of defiance completely unraveled the warship's chain of command. Mara spoke first. "Commander, we should simply dispose of her and proceed with dissecting the remains. Let the science directorate glean what they can post-mortem. This psychological stalemate is damaging our prestige." Perrin frowned. High Command specifically wanted a living specimen to study the phenomenon of human fear. If we kill her, we disobey direct orders, and the data might be lost. The tension only grew. Zarek turned to Lyran, who was quietly analyzing Tessa's medical scans. "Observer, do you have any insight? Is she truly immune to terror?" Lyran mulled it over. Her vitals show that she does feel pain and stress. She's not immune. She's simply controlling her responses with extraordinary discipline. It's more than a mere biological anomaly. Her mental resilience is advanced. Varix slammed a manipulator against the table, rattling the holographic displays. "Then we will push her to the final interrogation level. If she survives, we extract the data. If not, we dissect the body." Enough dithering. Within hours, Tessa was escorted to an even more elaborate interrogation area. The lights flickered ominously, designed to induce disorientation. The walls radiated pulses that tapped into fierce centers of known species. Tessa stood in the center, unshackled, because the next method would rely on direct neural induction from the environment. Lyran watched from an adjacent booth with Varix and the other officers. His chest felt tight. He suspected Tessa was close to her physical limits. Her posture was firm, but the lines of pain around her eyes betrayed her exhaustion. Varix addressed her through a calm speaker, voice echoing in the chamber. "This is your final chance to offer your cooperation. If you continue this charade of fearlessness, we will unleash a neural disruptor wave that no species has ever withstood without permanent brain damage." Tessa met the nearest surveillance node with a steady gaze. "You're trying to protect your entire way of life, aren't you? You conquer and subjugate with fear. If you admit that it doesn't work on me, you lose face, maybe even your empire's advantage. Is that it?" Varix bristled. "You presume to understand nothing of our empire's greatness. We have thrived for 8,000 years. You are a microscopic footnote in our history." Tessa closed her eyes for a moment. Lyran zoomed the camera in on her face. He saw anguish there. She wasn't unfeeling. She was simply choosing how to react. When her eyes opened again, she spoke softly. 8,000 years is a long time to rely on fear. But fear is a flawed weapon if your enemy decides not to yield. Varix gave the order. Zarek activated the wave generator. Lyran felt the floor beneath him vibrate. The energy coursed through the room, aimed at Tessa's neural pathways. Tessa cried out as it hit her, dropping to her knees. Lyran's monitors showed her brain activity spiking into levels known to induce hallucinations, terror, and crippling psychological breakdowns. Tessa's breath came in ragged gasps. She clutched her temples, eyes shut tight. Lyran watched, heart pounding. Would this be the end of her resistance? Her vitals soared, dangerously high. The wave generators sustained the assault for half a minute, then cut off to see the result. Tessa slumped forward, panting. Varix leaned forward too, as if longing for the sweet relief of seeing her beg. A hush fell in the control booth. Slowly, Tessa pushed herself upright, trembling. She looked at the camera, tears streaming. But the tears weren't purely from defeat. They were the tears of someone in pain who still refused to break. In a wavering voice, she said, "Is that," she coughed, "is that all you've got?" A stunned silence followed. Lyran thought for sure Varix would order another wave, possibly a lethal one. But in that silence, Tessa did something that changed everything. She reached in her pocket. The guards had left her unshackled for this procedure. Even though they had confiscated anything they deemed dangerous, it seemed they'd missed a small metallic disc, barely larger than a coin. Tessa's fingers found it, pressed a hidden switch. A faint beep echoed in the chamber. Varric snarled, "Was that device?" A couple of guards rushed forward, seizing her arms again. Tessa offered a pained grin. "Your worst nightmare, apparently," she murmured. She lifted the disc, pressing it again. "Earth Specialist Tessa Blackwood, to Terran Defense Coalition. I've been forcibly detained. Request immediate intervention." The chamber lights flickered. In the control booth, alarms exploded into life. Cross-system detection arrays flagged multiple warp anomalies around the warship sector. Streams of data scrolled across monitors. The comms officer yelled, "Commander, we're detecting a massive incursion in real space. Unknown vessels, at least a dozen capital ships, emerging from artificially generated wormholes." Varix lurched to the main console. "Impossible." Lyran's eyes flew to the tactical screens. The readings confirmed it. The Terran Defense Coalition had apparently allied with various other species, forming a fleet that dwarfed the usual capabilities of a pre-FTL planet. They not only possessed advanced technology, but had arrived in an instant. The logs indicated designs the Empire had never catalogued, ships bristling with exotic weapon arrays. Within minutes, the Devastator-class warship was enveloped in a blockade. Lights flared, indicating weapons locked from multiple angles. The main screen flickered, and a new voice demanded communication. Tessa, still in the interrogation chamber, was forced to her feet by two guards, though her expression glimmered with triumph. Over the warship's broadcast channel, an authoritative voice in clear Quanari standard rang out. "Release Specialist Blackwood immediately. Stand down or face retaliatory action." Varix let out an enraged roar. "We do not negotiate. We are the Galactic Empire." But the screen showed the readouts. They were heavily outgunned. The newcomer ships had shield frequencies that resisted any known Imperial weapon protocol. Fearsome turrets gleamed along their hulls. Some of these designs belonged to species the Empire had assumed were unremarkable, but apparently they had all joined with humanity. Zarek turned to Varix, voice cracking. "Commander, I strongly advise compliance. They've got enough firepower to reduce us to cosmic dust." Meanwhile, Tessa used the confusion to yank free from one guard's grip. The other guards panicked. She didn't need to fight them physically. Panic and uncertainty were already unraveling the chain of command. Varric seethed, pacing in the control booth. He hissed at Lyran. "This is your fault, observer. You said they had no FTL." Lyran swallowed, his throat parched. "Clearly, Commander, we were misinformed. They must have formed alliances. They must share technology. We had no knowledge of this." Before Varix could lash out further, the warship's internal systems beeped again. A direct hail from the Terran flagship demanded to speak with Tessa or whoever was in charge. Varix thundered, "Bring that human to the bridge. I will end this once and for all." Guards dragged Tessa up from the lower decks. As they pulled her onto the command bridge, she looked around, almost marveling at the central command station with its glittering arrays. If she was tired, battered, or terrified, it was buried under a composure that startled everyone in attendance. Varix faced her with undisguised fury. "Call off your fleet," he spat. or I'll open fire on your planet below. Tessa stood straighter, ignoring the aches that must have racked her body. You won't, she replied quietly. Because if you do, my allies will obliterate you. And even if you somehow survived, your entire empire would face retribution. Trust me when I say they're prepared for war. Varix clenched all four fists. The rest of the command crew looked to him for direction, though many eyes flickered to the tactical readouts. The Terran fleet outside had formed a precise ring, targeting every critical system on the warship. It was clear that the Empire was outmaneuvered. A standoff of lethal proportions loomed, and the Emperor's proud stance on never surrendering weighed heavily in the air. With a trembling manipulator, Varix opened the main comm channel, the screen showing a stern-faced individual wearing an insignia Tessa recognized as the Terran Defense Coalition's admiral. The admiral's posture was confident. Commander of the Quanari vessel, we demand the immediate release of Specialist Blackwood and a full withdrawal from Earth space. Any act of aggression will be met with overwhelming force. Varix tried a final bluff, raising the warship's main cannon to power up, but the sensors displayed a dire message. Multiple warheads from the Terran fleet had already locked onto key vulnerabilities in the Devastator-class hull. There was no realistic chance of success. He hesitated, then forced the main cannon offline. Defeat was evident. Tessa crossed her arms, ignoring the pain from her injuries. This is what happens when you try to use fear to subjugate a planet that has friends, Commander. Her tone carried neither malice nor gloating, merely a statement of truth. We aren't immune to fear. We just don't let it rule us. The resulting negotiations happened rapidly. A surreal exchange with Tessa present, Varix forced to speak humbly, and Lyran quietly recording every word. The Terran Defense Coalition demanded recognition of Earth sovereignty, assurances that no further abductions would occur, and compensation in the form of shared technologies from the Empire. With the Terran fleet's weapons trained on them, Varix had little choice but to agree, however begrudgingly. The entire warship's command crew watched in stunned silence as the once mighty commander bowed to the demands of a species he'd deemed primitive only hours before. The crestfallen withdrawal from Earth came soon after. Tessa, battered but alive, was escorted back to her allies. She stood on the bridge, regarding the defeated Quanari. In the hush that followed the final negotiation, she said one last thing to Varix. You could have chosen diplomacy from the start. Your empire might learn that strength isn't measured by how many civilizations you conquer, but by how you deal with those you don't control. Varix turned away, his scales losing their luster. He refused to reply. Tessa was taken through a docking port to one of the Terran ships, welcomed by medical staff and a handful of other alien representatives who clearly recognized her. They offered grateful relief, one figure remarking, "We got your signal. Good job holding out." And then Tessa was gone. The Quanari were left to contemplate their failure. On the command deck, Varix made everyone swear not to speak a word of it to the other warships in the fleet. But the reality was undeniable. The entire vessel had been humiliated, forced to retreat. Lyran compiled a final report, detailing every unexpected development. That a single human woman, with a remarkable capacity to endure and adapt, had unraveled the morale of an entire Devastator-class ship. That she had, through sheer resilience and clever alliances, exposed the weakness of a regime dependent on fear as its primary weapon. In the quiet of his quarters, Lyran typed his concluding statement. Humans are not beyond fear. They experience it fully. But what sets them apart is their refusal to let fear define their choices. Moreover, they have forged friendships and treaties with other species we once dismissed as inconsequential. Together, they have formed a network strong enough to stand against an empire that believed itself unassailable. Our entire approach to expansion must be reconsidered. The warship glided out of Earth's orbit, crossing into faster-than-light corridors once they cleared the Terran blockade. Every corridor on the vessel seemed subdued, as if physically reflecting the Empire's disgrace. Soldiers no longer boasted of their conquests. Officers avoided eye contact. Whispers about Tessa, about the mind-boggling turn of events, drifted in corners. Some ridiculed Varix for his arrogance. Others wondered if the Empire had grown complacent after millennia of unchallenged rule. Days later, at the edge of Imperial space, Lyran looked once more through the viewing panel at the distant pinpricks of stars. Among them was the sun that warmed Earth, though was no longer visible to the naked eye. He recalled Tessa's unwavering gaze in the face of the neural disruptor, the mocking silence she maintained when confronted by the lethal beetles. More than any display of advanced weaponry or technology, it was her calm under relentless assault that had shaken the entire warship. She had demonstrated a truth that not even the Empire could refute. Fear works only if the other side consents to be afraid. A short beep on Lyran's data pad interrupted his thoughts. High Command was requesting a full briefing. No doubt they wanted answers on how an advanced warship nearly lost a confrontation to a single captive. Lyran exhaled slowly, knowing that the official version of events would likely omit the humiliating details. But no matter what spin the Empire's leaders applied, the facts remained. Humanity was not the simple, ignorant race they had presumed. They had friends, alliances, and a perspective on fear that rendered the Empire's tactics far less effective than usual. In the end, Lyran typed a personal addendum, just for his private records. We discovered an Achilles heel in our Grand Dominion. We have always ruled by terror, breaking species with intimidation and might. Today, we learned that a species capable of harnessing its own fear can stand against us. The name Tessa Blackwood will remain etched in the memory of this warship. And perhaps, when the Empire next considers subjugating a new species, we'll think twice about whether fear is truly an invincible strategy. He closed the file. Outside the window, stars streaked by in faster-than-light motion, silent witnesses to the Empire's slow reckoning. The Devastator-class warship carried on, its hull battered not by physical damage, but by a blow to its collective pride. Rumors would spread in the Imperial ranks. Questioning eyes would look to High Command. For the first time in centuries, officers and soldiers alike would wonder if the Empire's ironclad belief in fear had been undone by a single human who simply refused to be terrified. Deep in the warship's archives, Tessa's scans and data would remain locked away under codes meant to keep them from curious eyes. Yet there was no sealing away the shift in perspective that had already begun. Those who had looked into her determined face and found themselves rattled by the realization that fear, once the Empire's greatest tool, had failed. Perhaps another empire in the galaxy might have responded with introspection or remorse. But the Quanari had lived by fear for too long. There would be political fallout, frantic strategizing, attempts to reassert power somewhere else. And still, the memory of Earth's defiance, embodied in one seemingly fragile human woman, would lurk in every corner of their collective psyche. What haunted them more than her defiance was the knowledge that Earth wasn't alone. Tessa had proven that her species had formed treaties, forging friendships beyond the Empire's notice. The idea of such alliances, uniting technologically diverse worlds under a shared cause, threatened the Empire's policy of divide and conquer. If fear had lost its edge, then the entire tapestry of Quanari Dominion might come undone at the seams. In the officers' mess halls, talk of Tessa took on a near-mythic quality. Some whispered she was genetically engineered. Others claimed she was a psychic mutant. Still others insisted she was simply the unfortunate victim of so many abductions that she had learned to endure the unendurable. Lyran, having studied her scans, knew the simple truth. Tessa Blackwood was an ordinary human with a remarkable mental fortitude. Nothing in her genes explained the magnitude of her resilience. Her intangible strength had blindsided them all. Soldiers who once boasted of their unstoppable might now ate their rations in nervous silence. The mere mention of Earth caused them to twitch. Over time, Lyran suspected, the Empire might adapt its methods, switch to more subtle infiltration, or try to sow discord among Earth's allies. But that, too, might fail if humankind had already learned how to counter fear-based aggression. Indeed, Earth's strategy of forging alliances, sharing knowledge, and building mutual defense pacts was a reflection of a survival instinct that took fear and transformed it into collaboration. When the warship finally docked at a remote Imperial outpost for repairs, Lyran disembarked with the official delegation, where the local administrator demanded an explanation for the abrupt return. Varix fumed in the background, letting Lyran present the sanitized version. They had completed preliminary assessment of Earth, discovered some complexities, and deemed it prudent to consult High Command before proceeding. The local administrator, suspicious, pressed for more details. Lyran offered none. Everyone in the warship's retinue wore the same guarded expression, as if they were all complicit in keeping the humiliating truth hidden. That evening, in a cramped outpost bunk, Lyran prepared to rest. But every time he closed his eyes, he remembered Tessa's unwavering stare. He recalled the alarm klaxons that had erupted when a Terran fleet appeared. He remembered the hush in the interrogation chamber when she refused to crumble. An unspoken realization tugged at him. If one human woman had accomplished so much, what could an entire civilization of them achieve if provoked further? The next morning, Lyran transmitted his private recommendation to his direct superiors in Imperial intelligence. The threat posed by humanity is not purely technological. It is psychological, cultural. Their alliances span multiple species. Their defiance of fear is more potent than any subjugation protocol we have encountered, and their capacity to remain calm under overwhelming pressure suggests that standard infiltration or intimidation strategies may fail. He doubted the Empire would heed his words until it was too late, but he felt compelled to record them. Even if the official archives never saw his warning, he owed it to the truth. For Tessa Blackwood, he had a lingering mix of admiration and regret. Admiration for the courage she had shown, and regret that she'd had to display it under such brutal circumstances. There was a final note in her medical log, typed right before she was taken away by her allies. Even battered as she was, the sensors indicated no catastrophic damage, just extreme fatigue and stress. Anyone else might have been rendered catatonic by the repeated neural disruptor blasts, but Tessa had endured. The log concluded, in Lyran's own words, subject retains full lucidity despite highest-level interrogation protocols, recommending indefinite caution. In the corridors of the outpost, Lyran overheard some Quanari engineers discussing future missions to subjugate other worlds. There was an edge of hesitancy in their voices. Fear had begun to infect the conquerors themselves. In that ironic twist, Tessa had effectively sown the seeds of doubt in a once-infallible juggernaut. The Empire had always been the embodiment of dread to others, yet now it found itself unsettled, uncertain. The question was how they would react: double down on tyranny, or possibly, if they were wise, pivot to a less oppressive approach? Lyran suspected that, in the short term, the Empire might crack down on internal dissent, stifle rumors of their loss at Earth. But rumors had a habit of spreading across star systems faster than official statements. Whispers that humans did not bow to fear would circulate among the newly contacted species, offering them hope. Alliances would deepen. The Empire might soon face the combined front of worlds that refused to be frightened into submission. And if or when that confrontation came, the memory of Tessa's unyielding composure would stand as a harbinger of the Empire's possible downfall. In time, Earth would presumably formalize membership in the broader galactic community. Their coalition might ask for recognized trade routes, open dialogues, perhaps even mutual defense stations. The Empire could no longer rely on surprise infiltration or sporadic kidnappings to glean intelligence. Once a species stepped onto the galactic stage with strong allies, the rules changed. For the moment, the Empire was still massive, powerful, and centuries ahead in certain technologies. But the intangible advantage they'd always held, terror, wasn't guaranteed anymore. The knowledge that a single human had undone that advantage haunted the warship's crew and would soon ripple outward into the Empire's highest councils. Lyran concluded that Tessa Blackwood's name would be carefully omitted from official bulletins. No sense giving other rebellious species a heroic figure to rally around. But that wouldn't stop the stories from spreading. Soldiers who had glimpsed her resilience, doctors who had tested her endurance, intelligence officers who had studied her scans, they would share, in hushed tones, the recollection of how she defied them. How she seemed to invert the entire premise of fear. There would be speculation, analysis, frantic attempts to replicate her physiological quirks in a lab. Yet all of that would likely lead to the same truth. Tessa was simply the outcome of a species that had learned to transform fear into determination. As Lyran finished reviewing the final data sets, he realized the warship had resumed travel, carrying them deeper into Imperial space. Beyond the observation port, starlight flickered across the hull. In the darkness of that corridor, Lyran allowed a small moment of quiet wonder. He found himself strangely grateful for having witnessed Tessa's defiance, even as it shook the foundation of the Empire's beliefs. Something about her raw will had awakened a dormant question in his own mind. If fear is not absolute, if it can be mastered, then perhaps the Empire's entire method of governance was flawed from the start. He closed his eyes, recalling the image of Tessa standing there, battered but unbroken, in the face of seemingly unstoppable power. The phrase she had uttered echoed in his thoughts. Fear only works if you let it. The truth of that statement reverberated through him, a subtle quake that threatened to dislodge centuries of inherited convictions. Perhaps, Lyra mused, that was the real reason the Empire was terrified of Tessa Blackwood. Not because she was stronger or more advanced, but because she'd exposed the Empire's greatest vulnerability. The moment you encounter someone who refuses to be afraid, your power crumbles. Somewhere out there, Tessa was likely recuperating among her allies, telling them what had happened on the warship. Perhaps warning them of the Empire's next moves. Perhaps forging even stronger bonds among the various species that had come to her aid. The galaxy was vast, and she was but one person, but the events set in motion would not stop simply because the Empire had retreated. It had begun a shift in the cosmic order. When the warship finally docked at a large, heavily fortified Imperial station, Lyran prepared for the inevitable debrief. Commander Varix would attempt to salvage his reputation, blaming anomalies or intelligence failures. High Command would want to punish scapegoats. The rank and file would craft new rumors. And yet the underlying truth would remain. The captured Earth's woman showed no fear, and it terrified the Galactic Empire.